actual nightmare family. A botched burglary. On February 24, 1986, LAPD investigators arrived at a guarded condo development in Van Nuys. Her husband, John Rutan, found the death of 29-year-old nurse Sherri Rasmussen, a 3-month newlywed. At 5:55 p.m., engineer Rutan knew something was amiss. Rasmussen's silver two-door BMW was gone from the garage. He was surprised she wasn't home as she had called in ill that morning. Rutan hurried inside and found his wife's body in the ransacked living room. Porcelain vase shards covered the floor. TV wall units collapsed. Documents were emptied from a credenza drawer. While Mayer, the primary homicide detective, began to reconstruct the scene, burglars entered the unlocked front door. While one removed equipment from the wall unit, Rasmussen surprised the other upstairs. Her robe, t-shirt, and underwear indicated she wasn't expecting guests. Rasmussen, 6 feet tall and fit, fought fiercely. A .38 caliber revolver was fired in the townhouse's second-floor dining room, possibly hitting Rasmussen. The downstairs burglar probably fled after hearing the gunshot. Rasmussen tried to escape or press the emergency button on the alarm panel, but her attacker followed. Rasmussen was bitten on her left forearm in the living room, maybe while wrestling for the rifle, and then hit in the head with the heavy vase, presumably incapacitating her. The intruder then grabbed a bedspread from across the room and shot Rasmussen through it, killing him. The next-door housekeeper reported hearing a brawl and a cry but no gunshots. She hadn't called the police, thinking the noise was a domestic dispute. 3 chest shots pierced Rasmussen's heart, lungs, and spine. The killer stole the garage-parked BMW. Mayer thought it was suspicious that Rasmussen's jewelry box was still on her dresser. Lloyd Mahoney, a criminalist from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, examined the body at about 2 a.m., his second nighttime murder. Mahoney looked for trace evidence around the victim's body, hair, fibers, anything unusual, but found nothing. He opened a sexual assault kit and took swabs and slides. Mahoney chose a 6-inch swab in a tube with a red rubber stopper after seeing the bite mark on Rasmussen's arm. He removed the stopper and carefully swabbed the assailant's teeth impression. He reinserted the swab into the tube, squeezed the stopper, and labeled it with his initials on the coroner's case number. A 5-by-7-inch coroner's physical evidence envelope writing Sherri Rasmussen's name, the contents, and where he got them. He sealed it with the date and time. Mahoney finished his crime scene work as the San Fernando Valley sun rose. He drove directly to the coroner's office, where an evidence custodian booked the bite mark swab on Sherri Rasmussen's arm into evidence at 10:32 a.m. Feb. Sherri's parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, came in late from Arizona the day following the murder. Nels quickly sought out Mayer, the homicide detective, who told him the police were seeking for 1 or more burglars in connection with the crime. He told Nels they had eliminated John Rutan as a suspect. Nels said his daughter had complained 1 or 2 months previously about an ex-girlfriend of her husband who had confronted Sherri at the hospital. Nels knew the ex-girlfriend was an LAPD cop but not her name. Nels suspected her. Mayer noted the ex-girlfriend in the case file but never followed up. A week later, the stolen BMW was found abandoned nearby, but it gave no information. 2 months after the murder, 2 men attempted a burglary a few blocks from Sherri's condo. Mayer focused his homicide investigation on these unidentified robbers after learning one had a pistol. Months passed without a lead on the suspects. In late October, the Los Angeles Times reported that the Rasmussens were offering a $10,000 reward for information on their daughter's murderers, 2 Latino men between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall. In 1986, when Rasmussen was murdered, Los Angeles had 831 homicides, nearly quadruple the current number. LAPD homicide officers solved 538 of the murders, 65%. In early 1986, nobody could have expected that police science would advance epoch-wise. Detectives' crime-solving abilities hadn't changed so much since 1901, when Scotland Yard confirmed fingerprinting for criminal identification. DNA was initially used in a criminal inquiry 7 months after Sherri Rasmussen's death, half a world from Los Angeles. 2 15-year-old girls from nearby villages outside Leicester in the English Midlands were killed, one that summer and one 3 years previously. The victims were raped and strangled and dumped on pavements. Police and concerned residents concluded that a serial predator was hidden among them. In 1989's The Blooding, LAPD detective turned crime writer Joseph Wambaugh described how 200 police detectives detectives hunted the murderer. A 17-year-old youngster who looked obsessed with the second crime scene was suspected. When caught and interrogated, the child gave a meandering half-confession to the recent murder, recounting his actions in detail before rejecting his guilt. Police were sure he killed both females. Despite their pressure, the youngster refused to confess to the first murder. By then, police laboratories in England and America were used to analyzing biological evidence, usually blood or semen, employing serology to detect blood type. It was valuable for investigation but too imprecise for a smoking gun. The authorities ignored serological tests that had failed to link the youngster to the victims because of the other evidence. A newspaper story about a local geneticist named Alec Jeffries, who had developed a breakthrough DNA-based gene mapping method, was mentioned to investigators. Jeffries, who would eventually be knighted for his forensic science work, immediately saw the promise of the new technology, which he called genetic fingerprinting. Police instructed Jeffries to create DNA profiles from the suspect's blood and semen from the two crime locations. Result astonished. The same individual raped and killed both girls. He wasn't the boy police had. Forensic DNA testing exonerated the first criminal suspect. The inquiry restarted with one exception. Authorities obtained a DNA profile of their killer, who they suspected resided nearby. In January 1987, the police asked all male residents between 17 and 34 to give blood samples for DNA analysis to remove themselves as suspects. The blooding was voluntary and few anticipated the killer to volunteer. Police thought the list of non-participants might yield new leads. After months and dozens of blood tests, authorities received a strange tip. At a pub, a Leicester bakery worker heard a co-worker say he had volunteered to take the blood test for someone else. The wife called the police, and the naive who took the surrogate blood test named Colin Pitchfork, a fellow baker. Pitchfork confessed to the murders and raped both girls. Pitchfork was the first DNA-convicted murderer in January 1988. Newspapers worldwide praised the breakthrough and marveled at how DNA forensics could change detective work. Even as forensic technology advanced, the Sherri Rasmussen murder investigation lingered. Her parents, Nels and Loretta, fought for the case for years. They returned to Los Angeles in November 1987 and held a press conference, renewing their $10,000 prize for arrest information. John Rutan, Sherri's widower, attended. It's been nearly 2 years of hell, not knowing who did this to Sherri or why, he told the assembled reporters. Nels wrote to then Chief of Police Darrell Gates in 1988 to investigate Rutan's ex-girlfriend, a police officer. No response? Nels reminded the Van Nuys detectives of the ex-girlfriend. He watched too much TV, he recalls. Loretta kept calling the Van Nuys homicide unit regarding Sherri's case into the early 1990s. The Rasmussens met with a detective who took up the investigation after Lyle Mayer retired in 1993 in Van Nuys. Mayer's replacement said he had studied the original case files and tried to forward the investigation, but he hadn't found any suspects and had few new leads. Nels offered to pay for private DNA examination of the evidence after reading a scientific magazine article on DNA forensics. The detective declined. He recommended the Rasmussens to live. Loretta stopped calling after that meeting. The sample of Sherri Rasmussen's bite mark was frozen in the Los Angeles County Coroner's office along with biological evidence from hundreds of other killings, awaiting forensic science and LAPD scrutiny. Detective David Lampkin was the LAPD's police-icon. Lampkin, a young cop, became detective swiftly and sought a sex crimes unit. Lampkin excelled, but by 1990, he was burned out and switched to homicides. Lampkin's sex crime history prepared him for homicide work in the DNA age. He was also adamant that the LAPD had a moral duty to solve cold cases. These families never get over this, he says. Lampkin witnessed the lab's coldest case in 1993 while investigating homicide at the Hollywood Division. In October 1963, Thora Rose was brutally murdered in her residence. Detectives had collected over 30 fingerprint lifts from the scene but had not identified a suspect. When the lifts were submitted to a fingerprint database in 1990, the computer matched them with Vernon Robinson, a previously unknown suspect. San Diego Navy recruit Robinson was 18 in 1963. After leaving the Navy in 1966, he turned to drugs and crime and was sentenced to 3 years at San Quentin for assault and robbery. Robinson altered after incarceration. He attended college sober. He married and had children. Robinson, a 45-year-old Minneapolis building maintenance manager, was arrested for killing Thora Rose. The LAPD detective who nabbed him was 8 when the murder occurred. Robinson was respectful in court. His church and children filled the gallery in support. Robinson was convicted and condemned to life by the jury and judge. In November 2001, the LAPD launched its cold case homicide unit after much political maneuvering. Lampkin led 7 detectives and 3 teams of 2 in the cold case unit. The cold case section screened all unsolved Los Angeles killings from 1960 to 1998 and 2002 and found 1,400 with excellent forensic potential for reinvestigation, including Sherri Rasmussen's 1986 murder. Lampkin's section investigated 1,400 unsolved homicides with excellent forensic potential in the summer and fall of 2003. The 1986 Sherri Rasmussen murder evidence was sent for DNA analysis on September 19th. Due to personnel limitations, the LAPD Crime Lab criminalist ignored the request for almost a year. Jennifer Butterworth, a criminalist, agreed to tackle the unfinished request in December 2004. Butterworth initially examined a blood swatch from the victim's post-mortem, which revealed Rasmussen's DNA. The crime scene evidence, a fingernail and a blood-stained towel, only revealed the victim's profile. Butterworth saw a bite mark swab on the property sheet. The rape kit and elsewhere had no swab. The coroner found the evidence after a week. Lloyd Mahoney's 1986 5x7-inch envelope has faded. It was pretty beaten up and ratty, with a tear at one end that revealed the red cap top of the tube carrying the swab. Butterworth found 2 DNA profiles in the sample, one of which matched Rasmussen. Her killer owned the other. The FBI's DNA database did not match this mystery profile. Butterworth saw an oddity. Since the late 1990s, DNA profiles have gender markers. Most violent crime suspects are male. However, Butterworth saw 20 DNA results indicating a female bit Sherri Rasmussen. Butterworth lacked context for her discovery without the case file, which contained theories and suspects. It was odd. On February 8, 2005, she typed her findings and transmitted them to the cold case unit. Just months before, California voters had handily passed Lisa Kahn's Proposition 69. Prop 69 required police to gather DNA samples from all felony and sex offense suspects and state prison inmates. The FBI's massive database has tens of thousands of California detainees' DNA. In 2005, Lampkin's unit was inundated with CODIS-based cold hits, DNA reports incriminating previously unknown criminals. As tempting as Butterworth's DNA finding in the Rasmussen case was that a woman might be the murderer, it did not clearly point to a suspect, unlike Prop 69's many cold hits. Perhaps for this reason, Butterworth's report entered into the Rasmussen case file, and the file went back on the shelf for a few more years. The cold case homicide unit solved almost 40 old murder cases by early 2007 when David Lampkin departed. Veteran homicide detective Robert Bubb succeeded him. Detectives packaged up unsolved cases and returned them back to the divisions where they originated or to the LAPD archives if there was no room. The Van Nuys division received the Sherri Rasmussen case file in a cardboard box in 2007. In March 2008, Bubb took over the Van Nuys homicide unit when its supervisory detective and 2 others retired. Bubb, Pete Barba, Mark Martinez, and Jim Nuttall made up the squad afterward. Van Nuys has 5 to 7 killings per year, down from 30 to 40. Bubb says 3 men can handle the murders. Nuttall and Barba searched for an intriguing cold case in early February 2009 after the squad's most recent homicide was cleared. Sherri Rasmussen's one. The case file was 4 books deep when Nuttall received it. They kept a pretty good chronological record of everything that was done over 23 years. When Nuttall reached the 2005 DNA analysis report, he recognized immediately that the gender marker was irreconcilable with the original premise. That jumps off the page at you, because when you have that, and you know the case is based on 2 male burglars, well, that alters the entire course of the investigation. Start over. The detectives re-examined the case with a female suspect in mind. After going through the case file, they had a list of 5 names, including Stephanie Lazarus, John Rutan's ex-girlfriend, with the notation Poe. Nuttall didn't notice the initials until he called Rutan, who told him Lazarus was a Los Angeles police officer. Nuttall was astonished that a cop could have killed someone and escaped. It was very hard to process that possibility, he recalls. The detectives checked the LAPD directory and found Detective Stephanie Lazarus. Nettle called Bub to tell him they had found the police officer ex-girlfriend Nels Rasmussen had mentioned years earlier. The squad listed suspects 1, 5. Lazarus was 5. Van Nuys detectives made 2 Rasmussen pacts. First, they vowed to keep Lazarus's name a secret and never speak or write it. They didn't want to tarnish her reputation if she didn't commit the crime or alert her if she did. Second, they swore to follow the evidence. Nettle claims that Sherri Rasmussen's assault was not random. Someone on that list did it. Van Nuys cops soon rejected 3 of the 5 women on their list for lacking motive to harm Rasmussen. Lazarus and a colleague nurse who had argued with Sherri at the hospital were the only suspects. We were teetering, Bub says. As for motive, the information that we had was that relationship had been over since the previous summer. They couldn't prove animosity. The cops investigated the nurse first to determine if she was a suspect. Bub arranged with local law authorities to secretly collect her DNA in Northern California. That DNA test was negative in mid-April, 2 months into the current probe. The detectives had one name, Stephanie Lazarus. The crew pieced together Lazarus's connection to Sherri Rasmussen. UCLA dormmates Lazarus and John Rutan became good friends. They dated intermittently after graduating. Rutan seriously dated Rasmussen in 1985. He proposed that summer and married her in November. She died 3 months later. Lazarus, 26, was a third-year LAPD patrol officer. She married a fellow LAPD officer in 1996 and adopted a daughter after becoming a detective in 1993. Lazarus joined the art theft detail in 2006, a prestigious role for Los Angeles police. She never used force or committed misbehavior in her long career. Still, the Van Nuys unit found more unsettling details. Mark Martinez remembered that in the mid-1980s, most LAPD officers carried a .38 as a backup or off-duty gun, the same caliber as the ballistics report in the Rasmussen murder book. The detectives entered Lazarus's name into the California state gun registration on April 30th and received a list of all her registered firearms. On March 9, 1986, 13 days after the murder, a .38 was reported stolen. Detectives received the stolen gun report within a week. Shortly after 2 p.m. on Sunday, Lazarus entered the Santa Monica Police Department lobby, introduced herself as an LAPD officer, and told the clerk that her car had been broken into near Santa Monica Pier. She said a blue gym bag was stolen and the driver's side lock punched. Lazarus said the clerk the stolen bag contained clothes, 6 cassette cassettes, and a Smith & Wesson 5-shot .38 pistol. The Van Nuys cops could neither confirm or disprove that gun was the murder weapon without a bullet from it. Nuttall had called Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, who impressed him with his persistence and knowledge. "We need to discuss everything," I said. "I need you to walk me through everything," Nuttall recalls. Nels told detectives in 1986 about Rutan's officer ex-girlfriend, who his daughter said had accosted her at the hospital where she worked. Nuttall couldn't provide too much due to the investigation's sensitivity. "Give me time to do what I have to do," he implored Nels. The Robbery Homicide Division, the department's finest detective team, would handle Lazarus's case if it went forward. RHD veteran Bub wanted to present a top-notch case. The police had anticipated they would need Lazarus's DNA to compare with the bite mark swab. Bub says they considered doing surreptitious DNA, but the circumstances were too complicated and risky. We considered it best to hand the package to RHD with everything done appropriately. Bub briefed his Van Nuys division lieutenant about the investigation. The lieutenant was the first in the department to realize that an LAPD detective was a cold case murder suspect outside of Bub and his 3 men. The Valley Bureau Chief and Van Nuys division captain were informed immediately. "We explained this could still turn out not to be her," Bub adds. The chief said Bub's team may keep the case until the DNA sample was obtained. Back at the squad room, the detectives prepared for 2 possible outcomes. If Lazarus's DNA matched the swab sample, RHD would take over the case. If it didn't, the Rasmussen case would be labeled investigation continued and shelved again, presumably forever. On May 19, 2009, Van Nuys officers met off-site with LAPD Professional Standards Bureau detectives, surveillance unit directly under then Chief William Bratton. After a week of monitoring, plainclothes investigators followed Lazarus on errands on May 27. The surveillance crew grabbed a cup and straw she threw away. The Scientific Investigation Division swiftly created a DNA profile from the straw saliva and compared it to the unidentified bite mark swab. When his phone rang on May 29th, Bub was off. Crime lab technicians called. It was one of those gut-wrenching moments when he said, "Yes, it's a match," says Bub. Lazarus worked in Parker Center's third-floor art theft detail across from the Robbery Homicide Division squad room. Lazarus was friends with several RHD detectives, making case assignment difficult. Greg Stearns and Dan Jaramillo, the two detectives picked, were chosen since they didn't know Lazarus well and had no bias. Bub prioritized investigating secrecy. Detectives gossip. Detectives are curious. Bub and Nuttall delivered the 4 Rasmussen case file binders to Stearns and Jaramillo at Parker Center within hours of obtaining the DNA results. We're giving them the spiel of where we are, how we got here, what's been going on for 23 years, Nuttall recalls. Nuttall and another RHD detective, Lisa Sanchez, spoke with the Rasmussen family in Arizona as Stearns and Jaramillo planned their Lazarus interview technique. Nuttall and Sanchez had to acquire on-the-record statements from the Rasmussens and update them on the investigation without revealing how close the police were to arresting them. Nuttall was worried about meeting the Rasmussens, despite his many phone calls with Nels. The hardest part was, "I thought, man, Nels is going to undress this. I know, he won't miss this." Nels greeted the LAPD investigators in the driveway when they arrived. The family waited inside. He walks me in, Nuttall recounts, and I drew a blank on what I was going to say. Loretta crossed the room and hugged him, breaking the awkward silence. She never spoke to me, Nuttall adds. Nuttall asked the family for patience one last time before the investigators left. The detectives rejoined Stearns and Jaramillo in Los Angeles. How to address Lazarus was a difficult question. Nuttall says Chief Bratton didn't want anyone approaching her with a gun or access to one. Nobody was going to approve us going into the house with a search warrant in the middle of the night and it possibly ending in tragedy. They held the interrogation at Parker Center's jail division below the Robbery Homicide Division and art theft detail. All 3 detectives, Stearns, Jaramillo, and Lazarus, would surrender their guns before entering the jail because firearms were prohibited. RHD detectives planned to ask Lazarus to interview a detained defendant with art theft knowledge. When she arrived at the interrogation room with recording equipment to videotape the interview, they would shift gears and eventually turn to the Rasmussen case. Lazarus knew her rights to quiet and legal counsel because she had arrested numerous suspects. How long she waited before invoking one or both was unknown. Nuttall believed Stephanie was sharp. Stearns and Jaramillo wanted to keep her talking while telling her she might go at any time. She would, technically, as Stearns and Jaramillo knew, Lazarus would be detained as she left the interview, regardless of what she told them. The interview was scheduled for early Friday, June 5th workday. Chief Bratton wanted to inform the Rasmussen family of the arrest immediately, not through the media. Nuttall was hired. He told the Rasmussens he was returning and would need to see them on Friday morning. Nels said he was seeing a doctor. I said, "Nels, if you can reschedule it, you may want to," Nuttall recalled. At 6:40 a.m., Jaramillo visited Lazarus's desk on June 5th, 2009. He was wired. "Stephanie," he asked. "Do you know me?" "Dan Jaramillo. I work over here on the other side." He explained that he was working on a case and had a suspect in the jail talking about stolen art. "I don't know a lot about this stuff," he told Lazarus. "Talk to him. He can be verified." She agreed. "Just for 5 minutes or something," Jaramillo remarked. When Lazarus entered the interrogation room, Stearns and Jaramillo abandoned the story of a suspect talking about stolen art and claimed that her name had come up in a case involving her ex-boyfriend, John Rutan. They told her they chose a place to chat quietly away from gossiping colleagues since they knew she was married to someone else. Stearns and Jaramillo questioned Lazarus for over an hour, obliquely asking if she was a witness or a criminal suspect. Every tangent returned to Sherri Rasmussen's murder. After Jaramillo asked Lazarus for a DNA swab and added, "It's possible we may have some DNA at the location," she indicated she wanted a lawyer. After 68 minutes, the senior detective up and left, calling herself shocked. Lazarus was intercepted in the jail hallway by other RHD detectives and handcuffed. Lazarus was transferred to Linwood, the Los Angeles County female prison, where she has been imprisoned on $10 million bond since the interrogation. She was charged with murdering Sherri Rasmussen on June 8, 2009. Lazarus claims innocence since her arrest. Her lawyer refused the Atlantic's interview request. Lazarus was found guilty of first-degree murder in March 2012 and was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. If you enjoyed tonight's virtual nightmare, I hope the like and subscribe button haunt you tonight. Also, turn on all notifications to avoid being haunting. If you want to share your own virtual nightmare story, submit via Reddit or Instagram. Links will be in the description.